Here we are in Dolan, South Dakota, a little farm town of 500 people. This is where my father had his first drugstore, where I was born and where we lived up until about age of high school. The Depression hit us very hard, and soon there were no customers for the store. I remember the day my father came home and said to my mother, "The banks are taking our house. We don't have a house." My mother cried. It's the first time that my father cried. This was a tragic incident. But we picked ourselves up and we went to Huron, a town of 14,000, and there my father began his business all over again, the drugstore. Harry Truman was a frequent visitor to Humphrey's drugstore, which was a Democratic center. And in little towns, you were so closely knit that you felt the pain of other people and felt the joy of other people. I think that to feel that you are valuable is important. Many older people are discarded. One of the reasons it's important to continue to work as long as you're able, as long as you have a good mind, and as long as you can make your body go, work, because that gives value to your life. In 1938, I received a degree of liberal arts from George Washington University. That was a high point in my life. I was involved in every activity from writing to debate to declamation at George Washington University. It's a long jump between Huron, South Dakota, to the great Library of Medicine, one of the great medical treasures of this world. It's a great place to be. Mr. Hill led the fight for this building along with my brother Hubert Humphrey and Mr. Michael. So we are the inheritors of a great gift. And I love this institution, the Library of Medicine, just as much as I love working with Eleanor Roosevelt. This picture of Eleanor Roosevelt and myself is taken at the airport in Huron, South Dakota. She came to speak in Huron to the farmers about the United Nations and the specialized agencies. She was really working very hard to make the American people conscious of the worth of the UN. Her life was dedicated to this, and I became an avid communicator on the United Nations along with her. Well, I recall very vividly the day that Mrs. Roosevelt had called our office at the Federation of Churches and asked me to come for an interview. I never saw the letter of recommendation, ever, even though I went through the files to find it. When I arrived at the White House, I was, of course, as anybody would be, terrified that I wouldn't get the job. And I was interviewed in the green room, either the green room or the blue room. I can't remember which now. I sat there quietly waiting for her. She came in. She asked me the usual questions about my background, what my interests were. And I thought the interview went pretty well. And I got up ready to leave. And she said, "Miss Humphrey, won't you sit down again? I have a question to ask you." So I didn't know what was coming. She said, very quietly, "What do you think is the greatest sin in the world?" I thought, how could this be, this kind of question? And I had my hands on the chair just as I have them now, and I went through all the 10 Commandments one by one with my fingers, and I knew I was losing the job right away. Terrified. She could see this. She said, "No, those are all bad sins, but there's one worse than any other. And your state of South Dakota was one of the first ones to commit this sin." And then I was really lost. She said, after I couldn't answer, she said, "It's greed, greed." During the Depression and prior to that, the farmers in the Dakotas and farmers all up and down Texas and so forth plowed every bit of soil. They never put anything back. They never had any stewardship. They just took and took and never returned anything to that soil. And she said, that is what I mean by the greatest sin in the world, taking away something and never replacing it. Ralph Bunche, of course, was at the United Nations as the head of the UN, appointed Secretary to the United Nations. And this is a picture in New York of Francis Howard giving him the peace pipe from Minnesota. This is a picture of Marian Anderson with Max Rabb and myself, a part of the United States Committee for Refugee, which was a very important organization in dealing with refugees after World War II, and my brother Humphrey, who was helpful in the legislation for refugees, bringing refugees from Europe into America. I had the opportunity to meet Elvis Presley. He was lots of fun. He knew about my brother's position in the United States Senate. We were in the studio on the set, and I had as many as about 30 or 40 pictures, and not thinking they were taking up extra space, I threw them away. But this one I did keep. But there's only one Elvis. One of the most gratifying parts of my life, of course, was working with the children in the underdeveloped countries, or we say today developing countries. It was called Public Law 480, in which the foods of America were brought to Latin America. Food for Peace, it was called. And I headed that program in the Department of State for a while. Another very interesting and moving person in my life was Doña Felisa Rincón de Gautier. She was the mayor of San Juan for 30 years. This, for a woman from the Americas, she set a great precedent. She was known as one of the great ladies of the hemisphere. Here we are. These people still live in Washington. Imelda Dixon, the daughter of Senator Chavez from New Mexico. Susie Long, whose husband was a congressman from Maryland, where I lived with my children for a long period of time, myself, and Baroness Stackelberg. Proud and happy indeed, proud and happy, following the election of President Lyndon Baines Johnson and Gilbert Humphrey to the White House. Well, we were always friends from the very day I tried to do everything that Gilbert did. He was my idol. And of course, when he was elected, we had a very good relationship because he had concern for many of the same things that I was interested in, helping people, foreign aid. But he was a great leader, and he shared his experiences in his office with me. He was always attentive to my needs. We were very close, and I lost a friend as well as a brother when he passed away with cancer in 1978. My daughter Anne was very active in social causes. This is her attendance at the Pearl Buck benefit for Eurasian children. My son and my daughter-in-law are the prize of my life. They are Judge Howard now, and Julie works with health care in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is at their wedding. Well, I can hardly believe that I'm 85 because I want to do all the things that I've done before and more. It's a great thing that we've got to do in this century ahead of us, is making individuals feel that they really count, that there may be a small part, a genome of the social system, but that part is so important.